Welcome to the MemberWise Best Practice series. This video is brought to you today by the MemberWise Network, the leading free-to-join best practice network for membership and association professionals. We hope that you enjoy this great presentation, and for further information about our growing network, please visit www.memberwise.org.uk.
So as Richard said, my name is Stephen O'Reilly, and my company is called Loud Marketing, and this is Amanda Forster from the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. So just very, very briefly to tell you about us. So we work with membership organisations. We offer strategic advice, market research services and communication services. And there's just a few of our clients there, lots of acronyms I'm afraid, but if you want to know any more about those acronyms, RIBA I'm sure you probably know, CIFA is here with me today. CIOA is the Quality Assurance Agency, and then the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe and others. So that's what we do. I'll hand over to Amanda now.
So I'm here from the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. We are a professional body, and like all professional bodies, we promote standards and we promote ethics in our professional practice. Our members, rather than being all bearded with stripy jumpers and sandals, are more often found in development sites working with construction. So the majority of our members are those like you might have heard about of the Crossrail excavations that have been undertaken recently. And within that massive development across London, we have members working as the lead archaeological consultants. The subcontractors on site are registered practices with us, and we also have members obviously doing the day-to-day work. So that's the kind of membership we have. In terms of our professional membership landscape, some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today are how we're trying to target different audiences and communicate with those audiences to make sure that our membership continues to grow, continues to stay with us, and also achieve some of those key things that we want to achieve as a professional body. At the moment, we have a very high penetration of senior archaeologists. The majority of our accredited members are at the higher levels of membership and are members, which is our highest level. We have 3 accredited grades. Our members represent about 1,200, and then we've got our associate members who are kind of middle to, it's difficult to kind of map across the different roles that we have. The managers, senior managers would be members. Our site supervisors, project officers are the kind of technical staff with mid-level responsibility. And then we have entry-level archaeologists who are our practitioners. We also have students and affiliates. We have a very stable core membership, and we actually do quite well on that stable core membership. Those are the people who are those senior archaeologists. They're in full-time, stable, permanent employment, and their employers tend to pay for their subscriptions. And then we have slightly more churn through the other areas. So our entry-level archaeologists, for example, have a much lower representation. We have a decent amount of student members, but we have a very poor conversion rate between student members and that kind of early entry-level accredited grade. So these are the kind of issues that we're trying to tackle. This is a triangular representation of our membership at the moment. And as you can see, this could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. So you could look at this and think, well, maybe archaeologists don't need to be accredited until they reach those more senior levels within the profession. Or does CIFA have a challenge with their bigger potential member body that sits at the kind of less senior level than the practitioner entry level? If you look at it the other way around, which is what the next slide shows, this gives you a kind of the real world curve, which is the curve that goes up and down again, and our current membership curve, which is the one that goes up. So basically, our tackle is that archaeologists do need to be accredited at entry level. Once an archaeologist has been working in the field for 6 months to a year, depending on their previous experience, training and everything else, they should be at a position to be professionally accredited. It's a very highly skilled and very highly qualified field. About 93% of entry-level archaeologists have got an undergraduate degree, and that moves up to 50% with a master's degree. So we're not talking about people who have to learn their role necessarily, but we're talking about people who aren't becoming accredited until they hit those senior levels. So in order to grow, we need to really engage with those entry-level archaeologists, and we need to persuade employers that they need a professional workforce at all levels of their profession. and their employees. So, in terms of our engagement objectives, looking through our figures, these are the kind of things that we've highlighted as both our challenges and opportunities really in growth and keeping people involved. Retaining the stable core, so not forgetting that 98% of retention that we have at the senior levels. We don't want to concentrate so much on growing in different areas that we forget about our stable core membership. The growth of membership below the senior level and stabilising that retention at those levels is also very important, and really increasing that conversion, retaining those student members and bringing them forward through a kind of pathway from student into accredited membership. Last year, just one student member upgraded to accredited membership. That's our challenge. In terms of the retention rates at that kind of entry level, the practitioner level is about 67% retention, so a marked difference between entry level and senior retention, and that's what we're working on trying to increase. And that's where Stephen's helping. Oh, and yes, it's interesting as well. If you look at some of the work that Richard's raised earlier in terms of the member-wise research, looking at what's happening across the sector, our goals are the same as many other membership bodies. We need to recruit, retain, and we need to generate that income and make sure that our members value that membership so they keep hold of it all the way through.
So where we've been working with the Chartered Institute, with Amanda and with her colleagues, is very much about targeting, which is a challenge for lots of organisations, membership organisations as well as any other type of organisation. So the challenge at CIFA, the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, is that they need to contact lots and lots of people at the same time, but all of those different audiences are bombarded, if you like, with inbound communications, whether it's email or whether it's tweets or whether it's any other kind of social media. So it's trying to work through the noise, if you like, that the different audiences are subjected to, if you like. And one of the things that we've done, first of all, is to try and start to think about audiences first rather than products. Now, in many organisations, it's quite difficult because they're product-driven. So whether that's a magazine or a journal that needs a certain level of readership, or whether that's a new policy that needs to be disseminated, or a conference that has 500 seats that need to be filled. In a sense, they're all products. So there is a natural product drive, if you like, within all membership organisations, and any organisation for that matter. Financial targets are often product-based. But what we're trying to do with CIFA now is to try and move beyond that. Those targets would still be there, but we're trying to look at audiences first. And that is going to help us in turn to segment and to target more effectively. Now, we're going to do that in a number of different ways, and we're looking at things like demographics, psychographics, which is social class, personality, lifestyle, that sort of thing. Career stage, we've already mentioned some of that. Amanda's already mentioned that with the different career stages for archaeologists, and geography and behaviour. So some of these things are fairly obvious, and some of the data that you need to do this sort of segmenting and targeting is probably readily available, certainly geography, for example. Things like psychographics and behaviour will not necessarily be readily available, and that's where research comes in, especially qualitative research, where you're talking to people in depth, face-to-face, preferably. And ultimately what we're looking at, when we're starting to move towards thinking about audiences rather than products, we're looking at what the needs and the goals of those different audiences are, because clearly they're going to be different whether you're a student or whether you're a senior person within a profession leading an organisation, or you've just started in your career as a graduate, or whether indeed you're some other kind of member like an affiliate. And so one of the things that we're starting to look at are buyer personas. Now, we're going to come back and talk about that particular element of it in a bit more detail.
So in order to try and understand how we target some of the people that I need to target in terms of recruitment and the kind of ways that we can target them through the work that Stephen's been doing, we needed to really look at our audience. Now, the Institute was formed in 1982, so we're quite a new professional body. As Richard said, we got chartered last year. It's a positive thing, it sounds like a disease, but it was really good. So we achieved charter then, and that's part of our strategic plan. As kind of progressing through that development and growth, one of the things that we hadn't done until we started talking to Stephen was really take a close look at who our audience was. I think we almost assumed that we knew that because we either all had a background as being professional archaeologists ourselves, or we'd been working within the Professional Institute for a long time. So in talking through those audiences with Stephen, we looked at both the external audiences, so the people we work with, the other professions that we work alongside, architects, surveyors, engineers, but we also looked at the different internal audiences as well and how we talk to those. And the landscape of archaeology has changed massively since the Institute was set up in 1982. And actually our outlook has changed as well, because we started as the Institute for Field Archaeologists, and today we're the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. So now we're looking at a much bigger, broader audience of archaeologists. And Stephen's been helping us target those audiences and understand what they need from us a little bit better.
So we've, as Amanda says, we've started to segment the audiences and identify who those audiences are. We're then looking at targeting each of those audiences, and we're doing that in a number of different ways. So we can look at size, so obviously how many people are in a particular segment, and also within that, what percentage could we reasonably attract. So for each segment, the overall size itself is one thing, but it's about how many of those you're able to get, and also differentiation. So you can segment your audiences, but we think it's a good idea to segment them in a way that where they're quite clearly differentiated, which is not always easy. It sounds like an obvious thing, but quite often different segments, audience segments, are quite similar. But there is a sort of a risk with that you kind of blur the lines between them, and it makes it less easy to target. Accessibility is where you're looking at each segment in terms of how you can actually reach them, and that's partly in terms of how much it costs in terms of budget, but also effort and time as well. So it's resources in general, not just money but time. The value of those segments, so trying to put some kind of value to each one so that you can, and when you combine all these things, of course, you're able to then rank those segments. But return on investment is important. So and this is where we're trying to move away from, there is this big audience that we're trying to get to, and actually we're trying to pick off different segments, target them effectively, but also evaluate them in some way. And another way that we do that is the Net Promoter Score, which I don't know. I just thought out of interest actually. How many people within the audience calculate the Net Promoter Score for their members? Oh, so quite a lot. Okay. I mean that's a good thing. So kind of those of you that don't know, this is where you use quantitative or qualitative research techniques, or preferably both, where you in essence you ask the sort of question, how likely are you to recommend X, and then you usually do it on a scale of 1 to 10, and your loyal enthusiasts are the people that give you a score of 9 or 10 out of 10, so they're very, very likely to recommend you. And then your detractors are those who score you 0 to 6. You kind of dismiss the 7 and 8 because they're kind of seen as almost sitting on the fence a bit. And then you take one figure, so it's the percentage of your loyal enthusiasts minus your percentage of detractors gives you your Net Promoter Score. So that's another useful way of measuring a particular segment for targeting. And also developing personas. Now, so this is where we start to look in a bit more detail about buyer personas. Now, just for those of you that don't know, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of your ideal member or your ideal segment, your member within a particular segment. And you look at the sort of things we looked at on the previous, a couple of slides ago, things like demographics, behaviour patterns, goals, that sort of thing. But what you're really trying to do is create a sort of personification of that particular segment. And it's about giving it structure and insight and focus and aligning with different strategies. It's quite common in consumer marketing and B2B, but there's no reason why it couldn't be and shouldn't be applied to membership organisations. So I'll hand back to Manda now, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about the personas that we're developing and the positioning, the routes, the outcomes, goals, that sort of thing.
So these are archaeologists. These are actually a group of very senior archaeologists. These are directors of a company called Rubicon Heritage, which is one of our registered practices in Ireland. Now, our personas are the people who are our engaged audiences, but they're also the people that we want to get more engaged. We want them to understand a bit more about what we do. So rolling up all the things we've been talking about, we're thinking about the different messages that we direct in towards those audiences and also how we're going to get those messages across to them. So these are 4 of our target personas at the moment. The senior archaeologists, the one that you see there on the slide, will be those that are the ones with the opinions in archaeology. They might run a business in archaeology. They certainly have influence, either because they're within academic communities or because they're running businesses in the commercial practices or they're senior researchers. So they could be different types of people, but they will be the people who have got formed opinions on what the role of the professional body is, what they should be doing, and also what professionalism is in archaeology. In terms of messaging, chartered status helped an awful lot because it shows that we've got to a point as a professional body, but also as a profession where we're recognised. Archaeology gives public benefits, adds value to construction and development. Those are the sorts of messages we would like our senior archaeologists to be telling other people about. We'd also like them to tell and help and support their employees to become accredited professional members. And we're talking to them through different forms. We've got an annual conference that's happened since the Institute was formed in 1982. There's been an annual conference. So we're still using that, but we're using that much more effectively to talk about these professional issues. But we're also we're tweeting about the advocacy work we do much more regularly. We've got a specific hashtag that people can look up, which is C for Advocacy, that just tells people about where we're going, who we're talking to, what we're doing, because that's the feedback that we've had from some of those people. We also have our student members. Now, these are obviously younger undergraduates who are coming into archaeology. In archaeology, actually, only about 10 to 15% of undergraduates will come into the profession. It's not taught as a professional degree. It's taught as a vocational arts, humanities type degree, and then we take those people that are interested and bring them into the profession through a number of different routes, specialising through master's programmes, those sorts of things. We're talking to students a lot more visibly, so we'll go out to different academic departments, for example, and talk to students, take the opportunity to talk to lecturers as well, who aren't always going to be members and are actually very often not going to be professional members in terms of being accredited. We also have our external audiences, so talking to those people we work with, the project architect, for example, who will have an opinion about archaeology, and their experience of archaeology will help form that opinion. And what we need to do is to try and address those opinions. We need to talk about value, and we need to talk about what working with an accredited professional can do to a project or a development project. Now, we're trying to do that via other professional bodies, through CPD and also through PR. So a very different approach, very different routes. And we're just publishing a client guide that's aimed at those audiences as well. And then we have local authority planners. So they could be archaeologists and they could be professionally accredited. They could be conservation officers and accredited with other bodies. So they may or may not have experience of archaeology as part of their training. we want them to be recommending that people work with professional archaeologists. So again, it's a similar message to those that we direct towards the architects and the other professions that we talk alongside. And again, we'll be talking to those through professional bodies, but also other forums. For example, in archaeology, there's ALGAO, which is the Association for Local Government Officers in Archaeology. So talking directly to groups that represent local government archaeologists, conservation officers.
Okay, so I mean, we've spent quite a bit of time this morning talking about how we're segmenting and targeting and messaging, and I think, you know, that ultimately that's so far anyway, that's been the thrust of the work that we've been doing together. But obviously, we're also starting to get those messages across. So I just wanted to also touch on, you know, how we're developing communications or helping to develop communications with the Chartered Institute, and I saw within the research that Richard pointed out, that's in the delegate packs, that there were a few things that really aligned with the sort of thing that we're doing in terms of communication platforms and actual activities. So we've got the targeting and segmenting here, we've got the messaging, but ultimately you've got to get those messages across to those target segments. So Amanda's mentioned quite a few of those things, social media, Twitter specifically, conference and all that sort of thing. But also we're looking at the online presence overall for the Institute, so to try and improve the website over time, the interactivity of that specifically, and that's something that's definitely come through strongly in the harnessing the web research, also the mobile web too, that pretty much everybody now has a smartphone, and so the consumption of online information through smartphones and tablets is only going to continue. So at the moment the CIFA website is not particularly mobile friendly, but that's something that will change over time. So it's really just to say that, you know, clearly the thrust of today has been talking about targeting and segmenting, but ultimately, as I say, you've got to get those messages across to those targets. So that's the sort of thing that we're looking at as well.
And we thought we'd take a quick look at what our members are saying, or in this case, a non-member. So this is Robin. She was a member when she was a student, when she studied archaeology at UCL, and now she works in Qatar. But she works as a professional archaeologist, and she works with a team which does have members. We do have some international members as well. But we asked her what she thought and why she didn't continue her membership when she graduated.
Well, I think that one of the biggest problems at the moment is communication between graduates and early career archaeologists and the CIOA. I think that greater transparency and support and training opportunities that the CIOA offers will be a great benefit.
So to kind of pick up on some of those things, I mean, Robin said it within the first sentence, it's about communication, which is kind of what we're all talking about today. So it's a good thing to start focusing on. Some of the things that we're actually doing, so we're taking the advice that we're being given from Stephen and turning it into actual tangible benefits for members. We're creating a pathway to accreditation. So we're kind of signposting students from their graduation into professional accreditation. We're not inventing whole new membership grades or whole new benefit services, but we're really signposting the ones that already exist and telling them why it's important to them to use them and to take advantage of them while they are students as well. We're also set up a new generation SIG as well, so we've got a special interest group that's really focusing on those early career graduates, people in training and people working at those levels, so they can talk to them peer to peer rather than having or rather than being told that they should be a member by their senior archaeologist boss. We're trying to get people to talk like for like as well. And then this is Lisa. She's one of the directors of one of our registered organisations, and she's a very senior archaeologist.
If CIFA really wants to help people join who don't fit the traditional bill of what membership in an archaeological institute looks like, then they need to make it easier. Most of the processes in terms of membership still revolve around traditional traditional field archaeological roles. And a lot of the communications still revolve around commercial archaeology or digging or things like that that are traditionally part of what an archaeologist does, but don't necessarily reflect all the different kinds of specialisms that there are now. So there needs to be more communication, and it needs to be constant, and it needs to be consistent. Help those people understand that actually they do belong, and they should belong.
So again, communication is a key thing there, and telling people about some of the things that we are already doing. We've got 17 different specialist networks within CIFA, and what we're trying to do with those is get them, our volunteers, we have approximately 200 volunteers most of the time, to get them talking to people about why they should become professionally accredited and how they can do it. A lot of the hurdle is that people have this perception that the Institute is what it was in 1982. And we've got to bring people with us rather, in that kind of changing landscape of what archaeology is today and what professionalism is for all archaeologists, not just field archaeologists.
Okay, and I just wanted to bring in, just very briefly, just another aspect to this as well, because in order to be able to deliver a lot of this targeting and segmenting that we're doing and developing messages and more effective communications, in order to be able to deliver that, the other thing that we did last year was to create a new brand identity. And the reasons that we did that are really very similar to what Amanda's just said. That you can see on the left was the old logo. Clearly it's not just about brand identities are not just about logos, but I just thought I'd put the two on here just to illustrate the point, really. There was some resistance, which Amanda will talk about, I think, in a second, but ultimately there was consensus that it was best to invest in a new identity in order to back up all of the stuff that we've just talked about in terms of segmenting, targeting, messaging, and all of that kind of. If we tried to do that with the identity on the left, it would not be as effective in terms of engaging with people as hopefully it will be now.
Yes, so just to back up some of that, change and refreshment of the image has a real link to that idea of actually bringing up to date the Institute and saying that this is the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists today, and that it's not new, but it's built on a very sound platform. It doesn't have to look identical to the previous branding in terms of logos, and certainly that resistance was there, both within the Institute, in members of staff, especially ones that have worked there for a long time and nurtured that look and that brand, but also a lot of the people that volunteer for us and sit on our advisory council have done so for a number of years as well. They might rotate from different committees, but our engaged audiences, people are always a little bit nervous about change. So, but it really lent itself to those kind of messages about not that this is a new institute, but this is a now institute and we've changed our feel.
Okay, then just very briefly.
This is the final slide, yes. So this was just really, I mean, we're really starting this process. We haven't got lots of quantitative information about how successful it's been and what we've been doing because we're at the beginning of the process. But in just updating the figures very recently, and looking at the retention of specifically the practitioners, which is the middle column. If you look at the retention from 2013, it sat at 67%, and in 2014 that was boosted right up to 95%. Some of that will be linked to that change, that charter. I think that they might be hanging on and thinking what's going to happen next. So what we need to do with Stephen's help is make sure that they want to stay again for another year and that we keep them engaged.
This online resource was brought to you today by the MemberWise Network, the leading free-to-join best practice network for membership and association professionals. Find out how we can provide you with more practical help and support at www.memberwise.org.uk.